The chair was lower than I expected. Not broken, not cheap, just low enough to remind me that my body now noticed things before my mind did. I sat down carefully, the way you do when you don't want anyone to see you adjust. My knees were a little higher than they should have been. I tried to shift, then stopped halfway, afraid the movement would look like discomfort. At 63, discomfort isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's something you negotiate with in silence. Across the table, she opened the folder with both hands. No rush. No greeting beyond a brief nod. The sound of paper sliding against paper filled the room more than it should have. She didn't look at me. Not when she opened it. Not when she turned the first page. The lights were too bright. I noticed it because I didn't want to notice anything else. I kept my hands folded in my lap, fingers laced tighter than necessary. Stillness reads as confidence. Or at least it used to. She turned another page. I caught my own name printed at the top, bold and clean, followed by lines of text that reduced 40 years of work to sentences that could fit between coffee breaks. Her eyes moved steadily. No pauses yet. I wondered, not for the first time, if this was easier for her when she didn't look up. If reading me like this, flat, silent, kept things simple. I surprised myself with a thought that made my stomach tighten. Good. Don't look at me. Just finish it. The shame of that thought arrived immediately. I didn't want to be spared. I just wanted it over. Her pen stopped. Not where I hoped it would. She underlined something once, slowly, as if making sure the ink held. I leaned forward without meaning to, then caught myself and leaned back again, stiff. The word senior stood out. Not polite. Not respectful. Categorized. Below it, limited adaptability. My mouth went dry. Not emotional. Physical. She stayed there, on that line, long enough for me to know she'd seen it too. I considered making a joke. I'd always been good at that. Age jokes. Self-deprecation. The kind that makes people relax. I almost did it out of habit. Then I had another thought, uglier than the first. If I joke, maybe she'll like me more. That one sat heavy. I hated myself for it. She turned the page. The clock ticked. Loud now. I noticed a thin scratch on the table between us, white against the wood, like someone had dragged something sharp without caring. My left leg began to ache. I tried to cross it over my right the way I used to. It didn't work. My ankle hovered in the air for a second too long before I dropped it back down. I felt exposed. She underlined another line. Non-strategic role. Something in my chest dropped, not a punch, more like an elevator stopping too fast. 40 years of being useful without needing to explain myself, flattened into that. I stared at her hands instead of her face. Steady hands. No tremor. No doubt. Hands that didn't carry people home at night. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Hale. Professional. Clean. Daniel, I said quickly. Too quickly. My voice sounded thinner than it used to, like it had lost something on the way out. She paused. Just a fraction. The pen stayed in the air. Daniel, she repeated. Then she read one sentence out loud. The first one she'd underlined. Her voice was neutral, practiced, like she was reading a safety notice. When she finished, she closed the folder halfway. Not all the way. That's how you're described here, she said. No judgment. No apology. I nodded. I didn't know why. Agreement felt easier than arguing with ink. I waited for her to look at me then. To check my face against the words. She didn't. The silence came back heavier than before. My chest tightened, sharp and sudden, enough that I had to take a slow breath and then another, careful not to show it. I realized I was holding myself very still, not to look confident anymore, but because any movement felt like it might crack something open that I didn't know how to put back together. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel like it could keep me from coming apart. The underground garage smelled of concrete and old rain. Somewhere above me, a pipe dripped at an uneven pace, close enough to sound intentional. My chest felt calmer than it had upstairs, but only because no one was watching. I loosened my grip slowly. My fingers hurt. I hadn't noticed how hard I'd been holding on. The windshield showed a faint reflection of my face, older than I felt an hour ago. I looked like a man waiting for instructions. I hated that. I hated even more that a small, ugly part of me was still hoping she might come down the stairs and say something, anything, that would let me leave lighter. My phone lay face down in the cup holder. I didn't touch it. I didn't want a message that would settle things. Settled meant finished. Finished meant correct. The thought that stung wasn't about the job. It was simpler. If she had looked up, just once, I wouldn't feel this stupid sitting here. That was the humiliating part. Not the words in the file. The need. I told myself to start the engine. My hand moved toward the key and stopped. The silence in the car felt heavier than the silence in the room had been. Up there, she hadn't looked at me. Down here, I couldn't stop looking at myself. I opened the door and stepped out before I could argue with the impulse. The air was cold. It helped. Anger always did better in the cold. The elevator took too long. When the doors opened, the lobby smelled of citrus and something expensive I couldn't name. I told myself I was going back for my visitor badge. That was true. It was also a lie I needed to keep my spine straight. The corridor outside the conference rooms was quieter now, most doors shut, the building breathing through vents like it was asleep but listening. I stopped outside her door. For a second, I hoped she wouldn't be there. That hope embarrassed me too. I knocked once, firm enough to sound deliberate. Her voice came quickly. Come in. The room hadn't changed. Same lights. Same skyline print. Same chair waiting to remind the next man he was replaceable. She was standing this time. The folder lay closed on the table, her hand resting on it as if it might slide away on its own. She looked up when I entered, only briefly, but long enough for my stomach to tighten. A stupid thought flashed, unwanted and small, she sees the age on me now. I hated myself for thinking it. I forgot this, I said, holding up the badge. The excuse sounded thin even to me. She nodded and walked around the table. Up close, I noticed things I hadn't before, faint shadows under her eyes, a tightness at the corners of her mouth, the look of someone who'd been careful all day and was tired of it. When she reached for the badge, her fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second. Not fear. Calculation. Thank you, she said. Her voice had lost some of its edge. Not warmth, just less armor. She didn't offer me the chair. I was grateful. Sitting felt like surrender now. I stood there holding the badge longer than necessary, aware of my shoulders, my posture, the way I was probably leaning forward without meaning to. Another shameful thought crept in, stand straight. Don't look old. It made my jaw clench. She glanced toward the glass wall, then back to the table. The room had rules. I could feel them pressing in. I should have left. That would have been clean. Respectable. Instead, I stayed. I'm not asking you to change anything, I said. The words sounded smaller than I wanted. She didn't look at me. Then what are you asking? That was the moment. I could hear my own pulse. Part of me wanted to soften it, turn it into something polite. Another part was tired of being polite. I'm asking you to look at me when you read it, I said. That's all. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. No defense. No explanation. A faint flush rose along her neck, and she looked away, as if the request had reached somewhere it wasn't supposed to. The silence that followed wasn't dismissive. It was loaded. I realized she was thinking not about me, but about witnesses. About consequences. She took off her glasses and set them down carefully, like placing something fragile. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. Tired. Human. I didn't write those lines, she said. But I'm responsible for them. I know, I said. That doesn't make it easier. She opened the folder, then closed it again without looking inside. She slid it a few inches away, not far, just enough to acknowledge it was there. Daniel, she said, testing my name. You need to come back tomorrow. 9 o'clock. Same room. For what? I asked. Her hesitation was longer this time. I can't put it in an email, she said. And I can't promise anything. That did it. Whatever balance I'd found slipped. The invitation didn't feel like an opportunity. It felt like another room, another chair, another version of me waiting to be reduced. I nodded anyway. What else was there? I left without shaking her hand. In the hallway, my breath hitched hard enough that I had to stop walking. My chest tightened, sharp and unfamiliar, and I pressed my palm against it, not to calm myself but to make sure it was still doing what it was supposed to do. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel hopeful. I felt altered, in a way I couldn't name yet, like something had been shifted inside me and set down wrong. As I stepped back into the elevator, one thought kept circling, stubborn and cold, I don't know what she just did to me. The room smelled different in the morning. Less cold coffee, more fresh toner and whatever cleaning spray they used to erase the last person's nerves from the table. The lights were the same, though, too bright, too even, like the building didn't believe in shadows. I arrived early on purpose, then stood outside the door for a full minute without touching the handle. Not because I was afraid of her. Because I was afraid of how quickly I'd started arranging my day around a woman's eyes. That thought made my face heat. 63 years old and still capable of that kind of weakness. I swallowed, rubbed my thumb against my index finger until I felt the skin catch, and went in. She was already there. No glasses yet. A paper cup of coffee near her elbow that she hadn't touched. The folder lay on the table, but it wasn't open. Instead there were two new things, a thin stack of printed pages clipped to a board, and a second chair positioned beside mine, angled slightly inward like an invitation to be outnumbered. She looked at me when I entered. Not long. Long enough. Daniel, she said. My name again. It did not feel like kindness. It felt like an attempt to keep the air from turning formal too fast. I nodded and sat. The chair was the same low one. My knees rose like before, and I hated that my body was consistent even when my pride wasn't. I kept my hands flat on my thighs so she wouldn't see them tremble. Before we start, she said, voice low, I need to tell you something. She glanced toward the glass wall, then back to the table. This isn't just me today. My stomach tightened. There it was. The system showing its face. The door opened behind me without a knock. I turned my head and saw a man step in, mid-50s maybe, tie loosened already, carrying a laptop like a shield. He smiled in the way people smile when they're trained to deliver bad news without triggering panic. Good morning, he said, as if we were about to discuss travel plans. I'm Martin. People operations. I stood halfway, then sat back down. It wasn't a conscious choice. My body decided I didn't have the energy for politeness. Martin took the second chair and placed his laptop on the table with care, aligning it with the edge like straight lines could keep this from being ugly. The woman across from me, her name still unknown to me, and that suddenly felt deliberate, folded her hands. She looked at my face, then down at the papers, then back up again. The movement was quick, practiced. Control. This is a standard review, Martin said, already clicking through something on his screen. Nothing personal. I almost laughed. The words landed with a dull thud. Nothing personal. As if the only painful things were personal. We're in a restructuring cycle, he continued. We're optimizing roles. Streamlining. Aligning strengths to forward-looking needs. I had heard that language before. I'd heard it while sitting in rooms like this and watching younger men try not to sweat through their shirts. I'd even used it once, years ago, to justify a decision I didn't want to own. The memory hit me like a sour taste. I stared at the scratch on the table, the thin white line. It was still there. I wondered if anyone ever fixed it, or if they liked having something damaged in the room to remind you how easy it was to mark things permanently. Daniel, the woman said softly. She waited until I looked at her. I asked you to come back because I didn't want yesterday to be the only version of this. I didn't know what to do with that. It felt almost human, and that made it harder, not easier. Martin cleared his throat. We're offering you a transition package. He slid the clipped pages toward me with 2 fingers, like pushing a plate across a table in a restaurant. It's generous, he added quickly, like generosity could replace dignity. You've been with the industry a long time. We respect your contribution. Respect. Contribution. Past tense. My eyes dropped to the top line. A heading in bold, role realignment and transition agreement. My mouth went dry. Not emotional. Physical. Underneath, smaller text, voluntary separation, effective date, non-disparagement, release of claims. My brain snagged on the word voluntary. It was a polite lie. I haven't been told I'm leaving, I said. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. The woman's eyes flicked to Martin, then back to me. Martin smiled again. No one is saying you're being forced, he said. This is an option we recommend given the updated competency framework. Competency framework. I felt my jaw tighten. Somewhere under my skin, anger started moving, slow and hot. What framework? I asked. Martin tapped his laptop. We've updated benchmarks. Adaptability. Strategic initiative. Cross-functional leadership. Velocity. He said velocity like it was a virtue, not a sickness. He nodded toward the folder. We reviewed your file. The woman didn't touch the folder. That was new. She kept her hands away from it like it burned. Yesterday, I said, and my throat tightened around the word, you underlined limited adaptability. I watched her face closely. A flicker. Not guilt. Something like frustration she wouldn't allow to grow. That was in the file, she said. It wasn't my assessment. But you read it, I said. My voice rose a notch. I hated that it did. I hated that I cared. Martin interjected smoothly. Daniel, let's keep this constructive. Constructive. Another word people use to smooth the edge off a knife. I looked down at the agreement again. There were blank lines at the bottom. Signature. Date. Witness. I imagined myself signing. I imagined walking out with a folder of my own, a box of desk items, a polite goodbye. I imagined telling people I'd decided to step away. I felt a flush of shame at how easy it would be to let that happen. To let them write my ending in professional font. My hands moved on their own, turning the pages. The package numbers were there, weeks of pay, benefits extension, job placement support. It was all very reasonable. That was the danger. Reasonable is how they get you to agree with your own disappearance. My eyes landed on a sentence buried halfway down. employee acknowledges that continued employment is not guaranteed and that failure to accept this agreement may result in alternative outcomes. Alternative outcomes. I didn't know why, but that line made my chest tighten more than anything else. It sounded like a threat wearing a suit. I looked up. The woman met my gaze. Her eyes were steady, but there was something tight behind them, like she was holding her breath. I made a decision right then, and it wasn't brave. It was stubborn. It was the same instinct that had kept me working through layoffs, through changes, through being told I was solid and reliable, like that was all a man could be at my age. "I'm not signing this today," I said. Martin's smile faltered, just a fraction. The woman didn't move. "Daniel," Martin said, voice still pleasant, "I want to be clear. This offer has a window. So does my life," I said before I could stop myself. The words came out sharper than I intended. There it was, my mistake. Not profanity. Not a scene. Just a sentence that revealed too much. For a second, the room went very still. The woman's mouth tightened. Martin's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, then widened again into politeness. "I understand emotions are high," he said. "But this is business. Business. As if business wasn't made of people's bodies and years and mornings like this." I felt heat behind my eyes, not tears, just pressure. I forced it down. "Tell me what I did wrong," I said. "Not what the file says. Not what the framework says. You." I pointed my chin toward the woman. My pulse hammered at my throat. I realized I was asking her to step out of her role in front of Martin, to be a person in a room designed to prevent that. She held my gaze for a long beat. Then she looked at Martin. It wasn't defiance. It was a question. He answered without speaking, one small shake of his head, almost invisible. The permission denied. She turned back to me, and in that moment, the distance returned like a door closing. "This process isn't about wrong," she said carefully. "It's about fit. Fit. A word that pretends to be gentle. So I don't fit," I said. My voice was quieter now. "Because I'm slow?" Martin slid a pen across the table toward me. The pen stopped near my hand like an offering. "Or a dare. You have time to consider," he said. "We recommend you take it." The woman added, softer, "Daniel, please." That word, please, hit me strangely. Not comforting. Complicated. I looked at the pen. My fingers twitched toward it, then stopped. A humiliating thought flashed, quick as a stain: if I sign, this ends. If I don't, I have to keep walking around with this inside me. I hated myself for wanting the easy exit. I pushed the pen back with one finger, slowly, as if moving it too fast would look like a tantrum. "I'm not signing," I repeated. Martin's smile returned, colder now. "All right," he said. "Then we'll document that you declined today. We'll follow up." Follow up. Another clean phrase for leaving you hanging. He closed his laptop with a soft click that sounded final. The woman didn't touch the folder. She stared at the table for a moment, as if the scratch line had become interesting. Then she looked up at me, and this time her eyes held something I couldn't name: regret, maybe, or fear of being seen having regret. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. Not a dramatic apology. Just a small one, like she wasn't allowed to spend more than 2 words on it. Martin stood. "We're done," he said brightly. "Thank you for your time." The meeting ended the way they always end. Neatly. Efficiently. Like nothing had happened. I stood too quickly and the room tilted for half a second. A small rush of dizziness, then it passed. I hated that my body betrayed me at the exact moment I wanted to look solid. I kept my face still. I held the badge in my hand like I needed permission to be in the building at all. As I reached the door, the woman spoke again, softer than before. "Daniel," she said. I paused without turning. "There are things I can't say with him in the room," she murmured. "But you need to be careful." Careful. That wasn't comfort. That was warning. I nodded once and stepped into the hallway. My chest felt tight, not like panic, like pressure trapped under bone. The air outside the room seemed thinner. I walked a few steps, then stopped because my legs didn't want to keep carrying me. I pressed my palm against my sternum, hard. My heartbeat thudded against my hand, stubborn and uneven, like it was trying to prove something I no longer trusted. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel respected. I felt processed. And the worst part was that I still couldn't tell whether she was part of it, or just another person trapped behind clean words. I didn't go straight home. I walked past my car like it belonged to someone else and kept going until the building thinned out and the city softened into quieter streets. My badge was still in my pocket. I could feel its hard edge when I moved, a small square reminding me I was still temporarily allowed. The morning had turned bright in a way that felt unfair. People carried coffee. A woman laughed into her phone. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck hissed as it slowed. Ordinary sounds. None of them noticed me. That part was familiar. What wasn't was how light my legs felt, as if something essential had been loosened and my body hadn't decided yet whether to collapse or float. I stopped at a crosswalk and waded through a full cycle without stepping forward. When the light finally changed, I stayed where I was. No one honked. I crossed late, alone. By the time I reached my car again, my chest felt hollowed out, like a room after furniture's been taken away. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. I kept thinking about the pen. How close my fingers had come. How easy it would have been to let the room end me politely. I hated myself for how much relief that idea still carried. The phone vibrated once. Unknown number. I stared at it until it stopped. I told myself I wouldn't answer. That whatever they wanted could wait until tomorrow, or never. The vibration came again, longer this time. I answered without speaking. Daniel, a woman said. Not tentative. Controlled. It's Claire. Hearing her name landed strangely. It made her real in a way she hadn't been before. Not the woman behind the folder. A person who existed outside that room. I'm not calling about paperwork, she continued. I shouldn't be calling at all. I stayed silent. My throat felt tight. I wanted to tell you, she said, slower now, that what happened in there wasn't the end. But it also wasn't nothing. That sentence hung between us, awkward and unfinished. I don't know what you want from me, I said finally. My voice sounded rough. That's fair, she replied. I don't know either. The honesty caught me off guard. I had expected reassurance or distance. Not uncertainty. I can't change the process, she said. And I won't pretend I'm not part of it. But I don't agree with how clean it's being made to look. Clean. The word scraped. You asked me to look at you, she went on. I did. That's why this is harder. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I imagined telling her how close I'd been to signing, how much I wanted the pressure to stop. I didn't say it. Then why call? I asked. There was a pause. I could hear traffic on her end, a faint crosswalk signal. Because if you walk back in there tomorrow, she said, you need to understand what you're walking into. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. Which is? Another pause. Longer. They're not offering you a choice, she said quietly. They're offering you time to agree. The words settled heavily. And if I don't? I asked. She exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a restraint. Then they'll make it about performance. Not now. Slowly. You'll feel it before you see it. I stared through the windshield, at nothing in particular. You're telling me this because? Because I don't want you blindsided, she said. And because once I know something like that, I can't unknow it. I almost laughed. The irony pressed close to my chest. So what do you want me to do? I asked. Be careful, she said again. The word sounded different now. Heavier. And don't come in tomorrow thinking there's a clean outcome. Clean outcomes. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Thank you, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. Gratitude felt wrong here, like tipping someone for delivering bad news. I'm not doing you a favor, she said. I'm telling you the truth. There's a difference. The line went quiet for a second. I thought she might hang up. Daniel, she said, softer. Whatever happens next, don't let them turn this into something small. I don't know how to stop that, I admitted. There was a faint sound on her end, maybe her adjusting the phone. Neither do I, she said. That's the problem. The call ended without goodbye. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the absence. My hands were shaking now. I hadn't noticed until the silence gave me space to feel it. I put the phone down and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. The leather was warm from the sun. My breath came shallow, uneven. I waited for it to steady. It didn't, not right away. What unsettled me most wasn't the threat of losing the job. It was the realization that Claire knew more than she was allowed to say, and had chosen to say something anyway. Not enough to save me. Just enough to make everything unstable. I started the engine and pulled into traffic without really deciding to. The city blurred at the edges. Every red light felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the hollow feeling had turned into something denser, almost solid. A weight that sat behind my ribs and refused to move. I parked and stayed there, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Tomorrow no longer felt like a meeting. It felt like a narrowing. And somewhere under the fear, there was something else, resentment, maybe, or resolve, beginning to form, quietly, without asking my permission. The next morning I woke before the alarm, not from a thought, but from my body. My chest felt tight the way it had in the hallway, as if some part of me had been bracing all night without my permission. The room was still dark. I lay there listening to my own breathing, trying to slow it down without making it obvious, an old habit, like you can hide fear from yourself if you don't move. When I finally sat up, the edge of the bed creaked and I froze for a second, waiting for someone to hear. No one did. I was alone. That was supposed to help. It didn't. I showered longer than usual. Not because I needed to be clean, but because the hot water gave me an excuse to stand still. In the mirror, my face looked ordinary and tired. Not tragic. Not heroic. Just a man who had lived long enough to know that transition was a word people used when they didn't want to say, "We're done with you." I dressed carefully anyway, pressed shirt, decent shoes, like clothes could negotiate with a decision already made. On the drive-in, I kept hearing Claire's voice, "They're offering you time to agree." The line repeated itself, steady, like something you can't argue with. When I parked, my hand sat on the steering wheel again. The same posture as the day before. I hated the repetition. I sat there until my fingers started to ache, then forced them to let go. In the lobby, the air smelled the same as always. Citrus. Money. Clean surfaces. I walked past the front desk without looking at anyone. My badge was in my pocket, and I didn't want to take it out. I didn't want permission from a plastic rectangle. The corridor was quieter than yesterday. When I reached the conference room door, I paused, hand hovering near the handle. My mouth was dry. Not emotional. Physical. A thought came, quick and shameful, if I turn around now, I can still tell people I chose it. I can still make it mine. It almost sounded reasonable. That was the danger. I went in. Claire was there alone. The second chair was gone. No Martin. No laptop. No polite smile. For a second I felt something that looked like relief, and I hated myself for it. Relief meant I still wanted to be spared. She stood when I entered, then sat again, as if she couldn't decide what posture was safe. Her glasses were on. The folder lay on the table, but next to it was a plain white envelope. That small detail made my stomach tighten harder than any speech could have. "Daniel," she said. I nodded. I didn't sit right away. My legs felt too light, like they might not hold steady. "Is he coming?" I asked. "No," she said. She didn't add anything else. The silence between us felt different without him. Less procedural. More exposed. I sat. The chair was still too low. My knees rose again, humiliatingly familiar. I placed my hands on my thighs and kept them there, because if I clasped them I'd start squeezing again. Claire looked at the folder, then at the envelope, then at me. "I'm going to be direct," she said. I waited. She slid the envelope toward me, stopping it exactly in the middle of the table like she was placing evidence. "This is what they'll send if you don't sign," she said. "It's not a firing letter. Not in words. It's a plan." I stared at it without touching it. "A plan for what?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "A plan to make you quit," she said quietly. The sentence landed with a dull, sick weight. Not shock. Recognition. The kind of recognition that makes your skin go cold. I heard myself swallow. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She held my gaze. "Because yesterday you asked me to look at you," she said. And I did. And I couldn't unsee it. The honesty should have softened something in me. It didn't. It made everything sharper. "So what happens now?" I asked. Claire's jaw tightened. "Now," she said, "you decide what you can live with." There it was again. The word live. The word that had slipped out of me yesterday like blood. I finally touched the envelope. My fingers trembled slightly. I hated that too. I opened it slowly and pulled out the paper inside. Typed. Neat. 3 bullet points with timelines. Reduced access. Reassigned duties. Performance documentation. The words were clean, but the intent was ugly. I read it twice. The second time, my throat began to burn. "This is real," I said. "Yes," she replied. I looked up at her. "And you're still sitting here." The accusation came out before I could stop it. It wasn't fair, and I knew it, and I said it anyway because something in me needed to push against a person, not a system. Claire's eyes flickered. Hurt, maybe. Or anger she didn't allow herself to show. "I'm sitting here," she said, voice controlled, "because if Martin were in this room, none of this would be allowed to exist." "So you're giving me a gift," I said bitterly. "Information." "It's not a gift," she said. "It's a risk." I stared at the plan again. A shameful thought rose, the one I didn't want to admit even to myself. If I sign, I can go back to being numb. I can go back to my life without this crawling under my skin. The thought felt like surrender and relief at the same time. I hated both. Claire watched me, silent. She wasn't trying to comfort me. That made me respect her more, and it made me lonelier. I folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. My hands were steadier now, not because I felt better, but because something inside me had gone quiet. A dangerous quiet. "I'm not signing," I said. Claire blinked once. "Daniel." No, I cut in, softer than my tone. Not because I think I can win. I don't. I know what this place is. I know what time does. I know what my file says. I swallowed. I'm not signing because I can't stand the idea of helping them write my ending. For a moment she looked like she might say something human. Then she pulled it back. Professional skin sliding into place. Then you need to prepare for what comes, she said. I nodded. My chest felt tight again. I pressed my palm lightly against my sternum under the table, feeling my heartbeat, steady, stubborn. What about you? I asked before I could stop myself. Claire's gaze dropped for the first time. Just a fraction. What about me, she said. Are you going to watch? I asked. Or are you going to keep reading papers and pretending they're people? The question hung there, raw and unfair and honest. Claire's fingers tightened around her pen, then loosened. She took off her glasses and set them down. Her eyes looked older without them. I don't know, she said. That was the closest thing to a confession I'd heard from anyone in that building. I stood. The room tilted slightly, and I waited for it to pass. It did. My legs held. I picked up the envelope, then put it back on the table. It wasn't mine. Not yet. At the door I paused. My breath came shallow again, and for a second I thought I might have to sit down, might have to admit my body was losing the fight before my pride did. I held onto the door handle and let the cold metal ground me. I came in here thinking I needed you to see me, I said without turning. My voice was low. That was the wrong thing. I needed to see me. There was no answer behind me. Just the building's quiet hum. In the hallway, my chest tightened once more, sharp enough that I stopped walking. I pressed my palm hard against my sternum, the way I'd done every day this week, and waited for the pressure to ease. It didn't, not fully. It just changed shape, turning into something I could carry. Outside, the morning was bright again. People moved past me with coffee cups, conversations, plans. The world kept going, indifferent. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the sun on my face, feeling my heartbeat against my hand, and realizing the truth wasn't that I'd been seen or not seen. The truth was simpler, and it hurt more. I had spent the last year becoming smaller without noticing. And now that I'd finally noticed, I didn't know if I could grow back. I walked to my car slowly, careful with each step, not because I was weak, but because I was trying to keep myself from slipping into the old habit of rushing to make other people comfortable. I sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine right away. My hands rested on the steering wheel, then let go. I didn't feel peaceful. I didn't feel resolved. I felt awake in a way that made everything sharper. And I knew, with a dull certainty, that whatever came next, whether I stayed, whether I was pushed out, whether I disappeared from their clean hallways, there wouldn't be a sentence in a file that could finish the story for me. Not anymore.